Everybody, welcome to another fireside chat with Hyper. We are here today with Amar Varma. Excuse if we're a little late setting up. We had some technical difficulties, but I'm just giving him some time to set up his to set up his rig on his end. I'll start by talking a little bit about the topic today. It's something that I get asked a lot by our founders, or at least the theme of today's conversation is going to be, I think, Mar, you might need to, I'm just wondering if we got feedback on the audio there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Okay. No, I was just getting feedback for a second, but it's gone away. Great. Anyway, so, this is a topic that is something that a lot of our founders have questions about. It's something that kind of, I think, gives a lot of people anxiety. If you can imagine a founder who is pre-revenue, they're talking to investors, they're talking to people that want to back their company, support their company financially, but then there's a lot of questions around valuations, cap table structuring, giving equity away to advisors, to first employees, all that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We got a half hour with Amar, who's been so generous to give his time to speak to our audience, our community. Very impressed with your track record, Amar. Obviously, you've done quite well for yourself in terms of the investments that you've made. Why don't I let you introduce yourself and your sort of your background, your profile, and your experience in the world of entrepreneurship and investments, and then we can dive into the questions.
Sure thing. Can you hear me now? I know we had a bit of a technical glitch. We're good. Great.
Can you hear perfectly?
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. I know it's a big commitment to take the time, so appreciate everyone doing that. And thanks, Eric, for having me. And I know there's a lot that's going into this topic. So let me just give a quick brief intro of myself and why I feel I can at least hear the questions and try and answer some of them as we go through this, because it's a tough topic. I've been working starting investing in private companies for over 20 years now. Started my career in Silicon Valley. I've had 5 companies under my belt. I've invested in over 100. I'm a LP in about 24 funds. I've been through a number of exits as a founder. I've been through a couple IPOs as part of an exec team. I've been an investor on a bunch of exits, good and bad. So I've kind of seen a lot of the goods in terms of the reason we're all in this game. And I've seen a lot of the bads, which are kind of the things that I've learned over time to try and steer around and avoid and make sure, some of the mistakes that I've made or things I've seen along the way, I can impart and share with others along this journey.
Amazing. Fantastic. So I guess, again, conscious of time, I'd love to just dive right into sort of the nitty gritty. First question right off the bat. And I don't expect like a detailed, answer around this, but just sort of like the philosophy, the mindset, the sort of, the approach that somebody should take. But when you're pre-revenue, and maybe even an idea stage, and you're looking to raise your first round of investment, whether it's $10K just to get an MVP or $100K to really sort of flesh it out a bit further, or whatever that amount is, but you're pre-revenue, you don't have a product, you're really just trying to get things going off the ground. What's the approach to valuation? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think the early starting of a company and valuation, you generally want to free your mindset around being able to build value for the customer set that you're working with or the stakeholders you're working with. You want to probably push valuation as a final answer as far down the road as possible when you're kind of working through the first few iterations of what you're working through. That's where these things that we're traditionally called convertible notes. They're now called safes. These types of instruments allow you to kind of defer a finalization of the discussion over time. It doesn't mean you're going to get away with not having to give equity up to folks who've backed you early because they're the believers and kind of the big reason you're out there doing this. So I think it's important to say, let's get in a relationship that allows us to take the money in and kind of push the valuation discussion down the road for a period of time. And you see that traditionally with cap notes and kind of these discounts to next round type of instruments.
And so, like, I get the impression that you've been in this game for a while, that the people that you deal with, obviously they're very savvy about how venture capital works, how it's structured, how the model works. Have you ever been in a situation where, and if the answer is no, don't worry about it, but where maybe you're dealing with early stage investors who are not aware of how that works and maybe just need to go straight for an equity deal right away because the safe note and cap note, or safe notes or convertible notes, seem a little bit too complicated, maybe it's a bit too intimidating? Or do you just kind of like bite the bullet and it's like, you know what, convertible notes are the way to go. I'm going to educate these people. I'm just going to try and get them on board the best I can.
This is kind of music to my ears that you pose the question that way, because for a lot of people, it's actually simpler to go for a priced round if it's there, and it can be there if there's sufficient capital at the table to make it worth the time to go through it. The reality is if you're a first time, even a sometimes second, third time entrepreneurs struggle with this, you're going to end up in a situation where you know what you know, you've identified what you don't know, and either you've tried to understand the risks in what you don't know, or you've taken a leap of faith in those items and you're moving forward and you're focused on the good outcomes because you do understand the good outcomes in price rounds better than you do in sometimes having the deferred discussion.
Gotcha. And so, and is there ever a scenario where, because I noticed Y Combinator, their investments are like a combo, like they'll do a safe note and a priced round. Do you ever like get into that territory sometimes in the early days, just like, oh, for these guys I'll do a convertible note, for these guys I'll do
yeah. I've run a summer program. It's dated now, probably a dozen years ago. It still exists today in a different format, where there is a be part of the program will get some notional equity, which is just equity, and on top of that, there'll be an investment in terms of a note. So you kind of start seeing this hybrid from organizations that have a formality around it, that really have the credibility to do that, right? Not everybody has the credibility to do that. So in ones where they do, take a second look. They probably understand what they're doing.
Gotcha. Now, like, addressing the topic of founders, co-founders, advisors, whatnot. Let's start with advisors. How do you sort of reward advisors for supporting you in those like early years? What is any sort of guidelines or advice on in terms of like awarding them equity, and how does that work?
Yeah, I think I've seen good, bad, and ugly on the advisors. The ones that end up working out are the ones that are generally also investors that have put their own money to work and want to see a good outcome for you. The advisors that start by saying I'll advise and then maybe invest, I've had mixed reactions there. And the ones that are generally just advisors early on, you do get some really good diamonds in there, but you're probably having to filter through a lot of rough to get those diamonds in that context. I've just seen it play out over and over and over. Because early on, the discussion is around what you're trying to build, and your story is going to evolve. It's going to change. The type of go-to-market could change. The type of tech you're using could change. And the advisor you have is the same person. Like I sit here today as an advisor, investor in companies. I'm probably not going to change a lot of who I am today, but the company's going to change a lot. So sometimes the Venn diagram of overlap starts to shift. And it's important to understand when that Venn diagram, the union of those two circles starts to drift to a point where it's like, maybe this isn't for the best. Um, so that's kind of one of the things I've seen. Um, and in a weird stroke, you also need some patience in letting that relationship evolve, because sometimes the advisor can really be helpful in a moment, in a pinch, in an instant that you didn't foresee.
Interesting, interesting. So is it almost like you need to be patient at the beginning to kind of just find the right people that you want to sort of enter into an advisory agreement with before, because there is, you are giving them equity and you are kind of,
Yeah.
you know,
Look, in the event you're successful in your venture, the equity is the most valuable thing.
hmm,
And so, that should be very scarce resource as people do view it, but you do need to dish it out at times. And sometimes the advisors that you need or come to your business, you recognize that as an opportunity first, generally speaking, because you're like that person or that channel to market, or the perceived value is generally high, and you want to recruit them to work with you and buy into your vision. Folks that usually come saying, "Hey, let me be an advisor. I can help you." There are folks like that, but they're rare. They're rare birds.
yeah, that is an interesting sort of rule of thumb, right? Like the best ones are the ones that you have to ask them, whereas like there is a sort of category of advisor who they're going around offering their services, but it's not as much value as you would initially think, and it's kind of like you need to be a little bit more suspicious in a way. I don't know.
Yeah, I think generally the folks that are watching this and are participating in this have a good sense of cynicism. I don't think we doubt cynicism as a group. Uh, but sometimes even talking it through, not only just with your cohort and peers, but people who kind of are 5, 7, 10, 15 years down the road from you in terms of outcomes could tell you, I didn't see value initially in that advisor, but they were super helpful. Or, oh, what a waste of time with that. You'll get both sides of the coin, and you'll have to process it and understand the context.
Excellent, excellent. And speaking of sort of managing those sort of relationships, which can go in either direction, good or bad. Um, how how bad is it if you enter into an equity deal at the beginning that is not favorable uh, when it comes to further rounds? So maybe, well, typical is an early stage investor just took way too much equity for how much cash they gave, and now you're raising your second, your third, your fourth round, and maybe the investors are saying, well, wait a minute, you don't have enough equity left, and you kind of gave this person a deal that's a little bit doesn't really make sense in the context of how venture funding usually works. Like, have you been in those situations where you have to restructure or have to deal with scenarios like that?
I've personally been on the wrong side of this equation. It was painful. It required a restructure. Um, and the second you're starting to doubt that your time as an entrepreneur is valued in the event of success, your your ownership equation is probably wrong, right? That's usually the challenge. Savvy investors on the next rounds will always do what they can to help fix it and try and kind of recalibrate these things. But as your company evolves from inception through time, it starts as a piece of clay, and then it shapes itself, and it gets a bit more brittle each year as time progresses. So you just got to be mindful of what you can and can't change over time, and yeah, you definitely want to make sure you're getting the right thing. And I see it in times like this where markets have changed, markets are perceived to be down, and everybody with a check is trying to extract their value for it. That 2 years ago would have been a different value, and 10 years ago would have been a different value. So you start to see that, and it's important to calibrate and understand what's reasonable and fair. Um, and everybody has a different view, and there's no right or wrong, to be honest. It's just what kind of moves the ball forward proverbially on a fair basis.
And then so this kind of brings me back to the idea of like what is the value of a company in those early days. Is there like are there tools or techniques to sort of benchmark? Like, can you if you're pre-revenue, but hey, I have a SaaS business versus, it's a B2C new dating app versus, it's a B2B deep tech startup. Like, is there a way to benchmark in those early days? How would you go about doing that?
I think there are some rules of thumb that you'll see in the various chat groups and forums. those generally prevail and set the market, so to speak. But there's definitely slight shifts when times are good, and there are steep drops when markets collapse. And I think we're in the second or third step of the valuation on these things. But at the end of the day, if you're giving somebody half of your business for an investment, they're notionally a co-founder for you. Does that seem right? Right? These are the types of qualitative questions that can help get quantitative outcomes. So, if I said, hey, Eric, I'll take your money and you could have business, I really am looking for you to participate in this business equal to me. And generally speaking, and there's exceptions, the money is less valuable than the time and know-how. Not to say it's not valuable, but it's generally less valuable.
Gotcha. You know what? This is what I have to really sort of give an extra shout out to having you on this call, because I don't think most people think about the macroeconomic cycles when it comes to their valuations, but you have been in this game for so long and actively investing and building and have seen so many different facets of it that you've actually seen how when you're in a bear market, bull market, how that can even affect and have a trickle down sort of impact on even early stage startups, which is kind of interesting to think about. It's not something I think most founders reflect on.
I'll just even add to it and appreciate that. For my own company in fundraising, I experienced different conversation than I would have maybe had I done it 3, 4, 5 years earlier, right? There's just a different outlook and outtake for investors. And it wasn't a personal thing against me. It was just their macro environment that they're dealing with on their investor base, their family office, or whomever. And it's not a personal thing. It's just the reality of what you can do and what you can get, with risk-free interest rates hovering around, call it 5% now. Your bar has jumped, and it's just a reality of how people are looking at things.
And to that point, so like when you're kind of going like back to sort of broadly thinking about when you're forming your first cap table, and before we get off this call, I want you to talk a little bit about Mantle, the product that you're building at the moment, that you've built at the and are providing for early stage startups. When you are forming your first cap table, when you're this is like your first few rounds of investment, any like caveats or things that our founders should be thinking about in terms of like that they may not be reflecting upon, but should think about before they do that?
For sure, there's a ton of hazards along the road here. I think people go into business as co-founders a lot of times. A lot of companies have more than one founder. I think not only how you split up the pie, but having a time component so that both of you or the three of you or the group of you can all bake and marinate together over time and proving your value is very important. So that's typically done in a reverse vesting situation based on tax jurisdictions and those types of things. But I think it's really important to know that what you think today as a thesis may or may not be true in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So you really need to understand how to structure some of that so that there's an ability over time to have some levers to recut things. So for example, I was in a board meeting today, where the company started with 4 founders. There are only 2 founders left in this business 4 years later. One decided it wasn't for them, went through a very painful family situation and couldn't commit the time and effort. And, we had to go back and say, well, look, here's based on the time that we've put in and kind of what we can do and kind of work out a situation so that the 2 that were moving forward were able to have different economics than the 2 that were no longer active in the business. So I think that's stories and lessons I've learned over time. That's really important. And then also on like perceived value, you really want to focus on the success situation. So having a deal where you're 99-1 with a co-founder, it's not really a co-founder. Having a situation where both of you are focused on, not getting to the next company, but winning in this company, that is the ultimate win for all of you and stakeholders involved in the company, whether they be founders, employees, investors. Like, that's why people are putting their hard-earned money and hard-earned time into these things. So I think that's really important to encapsulate.
So to your point about co-founders, is that now, you're talking about how people were, you had these four co-founders, two had to leave, two stayed, and how everybody was allotted their equity according to like what they had contributed, so that it's fair, but also recognizing that the circumstances have changed. How much of that is baked into the original agreement through vesting, where you say, listen, we're all coming in this as equals, but you have to earn
Turn
it
lights back on here.
out.
Yeah. True answer is they're usually not baked in,
Okay.
unless you think about it and have a conversation. Because you can go on any templates based on your country, and there's a prominent angel group, there's a prominent law firm, there's rules of thumb, and you could just pull out shareholders agreement, and it'll just be bare bones and basic, and the details are important, and they're generally glossed over early on, and like I said, it's a piece of clay that gets more, gets a little more brittle each time period, so it's harder to go back and reshape. So you just need to be mindful of that. You don't have to spend too much time on it, but you do need to have a discussion with yourself, your team, your advisors, your investors, and if they're working with you, Eric, in your group, like, there's a wealth of information there to be shared.
So in other words, you do want to kind of outline, like, hey, we're not allocating this equity, like, it doesn't vest immediately, that you do have to kind of earn it as the startup progresses.
Yes, and based on if it's your first go at it together, that's one history track record. If it's your third company together, you can have a different outlook on these things. And generally, sometimes the later stage investors, like a Series A round, will come in and reset that clock on people as they
Mhm.
see fit. But as long as you've done your part to be mindful of it, because there's very few situations where what's called the dead part of the cap table, where it's a person who neither invested nor is active in the business, right? Like, those are pieces of the cap table that's not contributing value anymore. Those are always tough things to look at.
Gotcha. I'm just conscious of time here because we allotted a half hour here, and you're clearly somebody who has a probably a quite a tight schedule. So I got one last question, and then I want it'd be great to hear a bit about Mantle and how that can be helpful to uh, early stage entrepreneurs. So going back to this sort of co-founder question, at Hyper we have a lot of solo founders. A lot of people that quite talented, have a domain expertise. They really have a deep understanding of an industry or of a problem, and they just want to, capitalize this and really see how, if they can create value around solving that problem. Um, if they want to bring in a co-founder, is it possible to kind of allocate that 50% equity, because say, hey, see, we're in it together, but also simultaneously retain the control of the company, or does it not work that way?
Yeah, control. I'm going to give you a bit of a long answer. The answer is yes and no. Control in a private corporation is different than notional control you see in a movie of a 50% plus one situation or public situation. Um, it kind of goes back to two items. One is who's driving the bus in a co-founder situation, who's the chief executive, and then second is on paper what they're, and when things get acrimonious or get tough, people start looking at the paper. And anytime you have to look at the paper, the relationship has failed at the relationship qualitative level, and you get into some not fun stuff on the document. So really good situation. You want to be in a situation where it's clear who who's driving the bus, and when things aren't working out or the time has elapsed, there are windows closed of what can be helpful for each other, that you consciously together, know what the outcome is, and there's a discussion, there's an outcome, and you move forward. And that piece of paper or documentation was never looked at.
Gotcha, gotcha. I think I'm just looking at the chat here, and I think the audio cut out a little bit. Even on my end, it was a little bit of
Oh,
audio issues, but I don't know if that's the internet or if it's just maybe being closer to the mic. But I got 80% of it, and hopefully we're back online with the audio. Mantle, it's a. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this technology that you've built and that you're um, wanting people to get value from?
yeah. So for sure, I appreciate. I'm not meant to be a sales thing, but let me just describe to you a bit of it. Uh, I've tried to encapsulate my understanding and learning of founding, running, exiting startup businesses over decades into a piece of software. And that really, I want it to be a co-pilot that helps you run the business, in terms of sticky things like cap table management, um, managing your stakeholders of a board, advisors, having atomic levels of approvals so that you can start getting things approved, like offer letters, all those types of things. Things that I've just spent an inordinate amount of time and mental weight carrying with me over the years. There should have been a piece of software to do a lot of this. And that's kind of the thing that's really got me jazzed and got me out of sitting at home and back at it again in a 1,000% way. So that's the high level of it. The URL is withmantle.com, and it's really starts as a cap table management piece with a bunch of the AI driven workflows and business processes that we've tried to encapsulate in there around, getting an option approved from an offer letter through to board approval and having that all simultaneously linked. And just trying to take the mental weight of carrying a lot of stuff in your inbox as a founder off. So that's the high level of it. I'm happy to spend more time outside of this if anybody's interested with mantle.com, and you can email me at summer@withmantle.com, and happy to help. But the idea is really you're not only getting the instantiation of a lot of my learnings over time, but you get access to me and our team, broader team here that's been through it and made a bunch of the mistakes or made a bunch of the decisions, and can help frame a lot of the processes as they go with respect to financing, founder issues, all those types of things, from a practical perspective. So that's really, really the big win on it, in terms of engaging with the platform. And I'm happy to take some more time if there's Q&A and things like that, if you have time allocated for it.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Again, I think the audio is maybe like a little bit, but I'm going to maybe have a look at like your mic and just give me a second. I'm going to share the link to because people are asking in the chat for a link to
It's withmantle.com. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna share this in the chat. It's withmantle.com. And then maybe hopefully your audio is a little bit better. Again, conscious of time, but yeah, if anybody's got any questions, put them in the chat. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 more questions. I know Joe Mascri had a good question here. He was like, "Oh, can you give a solution to this question around maybe running out of equity or giving too much away in early stages?" So, is there? I read somewhere. I read somewhere the other day that like you kind of want 50% of your equity left for your Series A, and so you basically up until then you kind of have 50% of equity to kind of play with in terms of giving that to investors. Does that seem accurate or no?
Look, I can comment on case by case basis. It feels rich, to be honest, with investors.
Mm.
There are good benchmarks that get published by, Cambridge is the definitive source that publishes kind of valuations by round. You can back of the envelope math the arithmetic, the valuation and perceived ownership. But there are other credible sources of benchmarks. I would look to some of the benchmarks and triage them because giving away half your business to Series A. If you need a Series B, C, D, depending on the business you're in, you're going to end up with not a lot of the business in the event of a successful outcome. And look, at some point you have such a big pie that even 1% is so big, right? But the reality is 95% of the companies end up in outcomes that are good. And you want as much of the ownership as you possibly can.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think so. Again, unfortunately your audio is still breaking up. I think it might be. I don't know if it's the platform that we're using or if it's you're dialing in from Toronto. It's maybe we're asking a lot about. So maybe just to wrap up, I think because I guess my connection, people can hear me. You were saying that you could. You said Cambridge was the benchmark for.
Yeah.
Okay. So the idea is that you kind of look at sort of companies, what they've given away in terms of, equity in the company for how much money, and you can sort of do the back calculation. I want to clarify when I was 50%.
There's a few other platforms that publish these things, and there's a lot in Twitter actually. You can look for them in Twitter. They publish them out there, and
Okay.
you can find
Yeah,
them.
I think Carts is another one maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
they do a good job too.
yeah. So I would just want to clarify because I'm seeing kind of some comments in the chat. So when I say 50% left for your Series A, that means that like you've maybe done 2 or 3 rounds before your Series A where you've given away like maybe 15% in one round, 50%. And these are just ballparks. Don't take it, as gospel. I think one of the main takeaways of what Amar was saying on this call is that it's there are benchmarks, but it's all about the sort of deals that you can kind of make with the investors that you're dealing with, but also just being aware that you're going to have equity left for future rounds. So again, to be clear, you're not giving away 50% of your company in a Series A, and you're not giving 50% away.
Some of the arithmetic, yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Amar, you really are your connection really is bad. This is a bit frustrating. We'll have to look into this.
Okay.
I'm going to wrap it up here.
Sorry about the mic.
No, it's these things happen. It's the age of the internet. Really thank you for. I think our founders. I can guarantee you have found this conversation extremely insightful. With mantle.com, I shared the link in the chat. If you want to reach out to Amar and his team about how that product can be useful for you in terms of like organizing your cap table, like playing around with the numbers of like, if I give this amount of equity to this investor and that investor, and how much will I have left, and that tool allows you to sort of get a clear picture as to what your cap table looks like. Am I right, Amar?
Yeah, for sure. And anybody who's part of the hyper cohort will zero rate it for the year. That way there's no cost. And we just want people to start getting themselves organized sooner than later. That way there's you're prepared.
How generous. Thank you so much. Was not expecting that. That's very cool. Okay. We'll send out information to everybody by email just in case they didn't hear. And thank you again for your time, Amar. We'll follow up. I'll follow up on email with you too to, send any people your way. Thanks
Thank you
again.
so much.
And we'll speak
Thanks,
soon.
everyone.